Some technical difficulties with Harvey. And he's gonna join us. Morning, Chris.
Hey, here.
Well, I don't have a chair.
You want the seat?
Can I switch up chairs and I'll get this one? Ah, thanks. So,
We're live. We're live, guys.
okay, hi. So Harvey's working on joining us. He's on audio right here and then joining us audio through the Zoom, but he doesn't have the video capabilities on his end. So we're gonna go ahead and start the meeting. Is that mine? Oh, sorry, that's yours, Paul. Okay. Okay, so not the meeting, the workshop. This is just a workshop. And I'm Aaron Rucker, Principal Planner in the Planning and Development Department. For those following along. The first item we have to discuss today is under Old Business 5A. It's a zoning text amendment ZTX 20-02. This has to do with city-initiated staff amendment to our zoning ordinance to establish design standards for small home, single-family in-common developments. And Dawn, for our host, Dawn, has Sean been patched in yet? Because Sean had an interest in following this. Did she hear us? Can you all hear me? She's on mute.
I can hear you, Aaron.
Okay, sorry, I should have asked. Is you there? Okay, there's Sean. Hi, Sean. Sean, can you hear us? Doesn't look like Sean can hear us. Well,
Mine automatically wants to like mute everything, so I have to go back and click it a couple of times to unmute it.
I've noticed that. And Sean, if you're struggling with the audio, you got it?
I'm good.
Okay, great. Okay, so small home, single family in common. This has been tabled for a couple of meetings. Pardon me?
Yeah, Harvey back.
Harvey, okay, Harvey, can you see us?
Yep, I got you.
Okay, I'll hang up this line then.
All right.
Perfect, bye. Okay, so as I was saying, this is an amendment that we took forward in March. It was tabled, citing some concerns that were brought up about minimum lot size, density, guest parking, open space, and commitments to landscape, curb, and sidewalks internally, with the exception of the minimum site size, which we as staff bumped up to 2.5 acres instead of 2 acres. Staff, we are amenable to suggested revisions to this ordinance. So, and we anticipate more discussion this morning at our workshop. So just as a reminder, in the text itself, in the staff report, detached single family and duplex and common developments are allowed, and we give you the requirements for those. That's a minimum 5 acre size, and density was 5,000 square feet. Just as a recap of what we already allow. Excuse me, Harvey?
Yeah, I don't have any sound, but I got the pictures, so leave your phone on.
Okay, all right, I'll do that. So as I mentioned, the staff were amenable to any suggested changes, and we want to talk about this with you all. We did make the change on page 2 of the staff report. You'll see it in the highlight from the minimum site size increasing from 2 to 2.5 acres. And then we also made the revision on the guest parking. We bumped that up to a ratio of 1 space per 4 dwelling units, just to add a little bit more parking. So that's what, if there are 50 units, there's 10, I think. Is that what we came up with, Jim? On that?
No, if it's 1 to 40, it'd be 10 for 40.
10 for 40, I'm sorry, 10 for 40, just as an example. So additional guest parking would be allowed. We also, well, I should say, Sean also offered his help in with his design, background and what he's been working on to provide some images and some perspective from his side. And so there's Dawn on our share screen in the PowerPoint. It'll show one image of an example that we've been working with previously. If you go back one, yeah. So this is a sketch that was put together by Sean, and it shows a real example of what we've been looking at. And on the left, you can see that under density discussion, it's a total of 2.79 acres. There are no wetlands. The entire buildable acreage is 2.79. If you teased out 60 dwelling units over that 2.79 acres, you get 21.5 dwelling units per acre. Okay, and so the footprints are around 17 feet by 34 feet. That's for each of these on average dwellings and footprints. You'd have parking underneath, and so and you yield about 0.41 acres of open space. That's 15%. 15% is what we're requiring as a minimum as proposed. So if you look to the right under these scenarios, so as built with 60 dwelling units, that's about one dwelling unit per 2,025 square feet. What we've proposed, and this was an issue that was brought up by you planning commissioners, was at 1,800 square feet, which is what's proposed in the ordinance per dwelling unit. That would yield about 67.5 dwelling units. And maybe as an alternative, one dwelling unit per 2,500 square feet would yield about 48.6, 49 roughly. So what Sean is helping us to realize here is that the 1,800 square feet is about right when you factor in the infrastructure, the open space, the perimeters, the footprints of the houses. 1,800 is about right. Now, and I should say also with that necessary infrastructure, it's highly unlikely that the full yield, in this case 67.5, using that 1,800 square feet, would ever be reached. It's simply too high a density to manage all that has to take place, within a site. 1,800 is the number we have. But like the alternative says, 2,500 is another number. I mean, we could bump it up to 2,500, and that would yield about 49, which is about I think the ratio of what this yield would have to be, Jim, if I'm not mistaken, around 50.
They were shooting for a yield in the low 50s.
Low 50s. Okay, so I think somewhere between 1,800 and 2,500 we could talk about it, Jim. I think if you all wanted to change that number, if you wanted to increase the 1,800, we could discuss that.
Well, and also there are other limiting factors as well, such as the required guest parking that we just added in when you put in parking pods, and this is assuming all the units are elevated. Well, the person we talked to was not discussing elevated units. They were talking at grade level units. So when you go grade level, then a lot of your land is eaten up with parking lots that you're not parking cars underneath buildings. So the goal is to get a yield somewhere in the low 50s. And so the number 1,800 is more hypothetical. When you factor in all the other limitations in the ordinance, you're never going to achieve that as a maximum density.
Right. Because again, using that 1,800, that would yield 67.5, and that's not what's being proposed. We wanted to try to get, a real example. There are a couple of other examples that Sean provided, and I really appreciate that. And they tell the same story. The yield, based on the yield and the limitations, that the yield will never be reached, or it'd be unlikely that the full yield would be reached.
Yeah, the 1,800 square foot per lot or per dwelling unit is a maximum hypothetical yield that is never going to be achieved with all of the other limitations that you have on parking, open space, roads and utilities, and for example, in this example you're showing on the screen here, I don't know if the units along First Avenue are being proposed or are being contemplated for having frontage on First Avenue, but that would not be allowed. We would not have direct driveway access for each one of those units onto First Avenue. So, that would have to be completely reconfigured.
Right, yeah, and, right. That wasn't the, and that's a good point, Jim. That wasn't the emphasis of the exercise, but it can be a little bit misleading.
Yeah, well, I mean, it just goes to show you that hypothetical yields are relatively meaningless because all the other factors that come into play make it impossible to achieve those.
So we wanted to try to help out a little bit, and again, thanks Sean on doing so. Some of the other questions that you all had, or concerns, I guess, had to do with open space, landscaping, curb, and sidewalks internally. I mean, there were some examples that were brought up. We can address that, can we not, Jim? I mean, we could address some additional requirements for internal landscaping and internal sidewalks, just even though they're on driveways. Are we?
Well, every one of those things that you add into the mix from a design standpoint is going to subtract from their yield. So, if we start requiring sidewalks and extra landscaping, that's space that can't be devoted to units, which, that's a planning commission decision, but bear in mind that every one of those things has an impact on the yield, and you could be adding a large laundry list of design criteria that ends up driving the yields down into a number where it's not financially feasible for the developer to even consider it.
So when I look at this, I see the minimum of open space was left at 15%, which I thought we had talked about leaving that at, or bumping it to 25%. I don't see anywhere in there where it has curbing, landscaping, or sidewalks, which we had talked about in the previous meeting. And my question is, when it says on-site guest parking shall be provided at a ratio of 1 space for each 4 dwelling units, are you indicating that for every 40 small homes, there will be 1 additional space for a guest?
Every 4.
No, every
small
4
homes.
every 4 homes, there would be a space.
So if we had 40 houses, we would only have 10 guest spaces.
Right, but bear in mind that most, apartment dwellings, hotels, multifamily, single family, those don't have requirements for guest parking. So this would be sort of unique in the sense that we would be asking for a guest parking provision, and we don't do that in other types of projects.
Gotcha. And then just below this, where it says where residents are permitted to own golf carts, is that golf cart parking going to be included in the parking requirements for the home, or is that going to be considered guest parking?
Well, the guest parking and the parking required for the units has to be able to accommodate automobiles. Any golf cart parking that they would provide would be voluntary on their part, and it can't deduct from the required car parking.
Okay, that was my question.
Jim, just to, address the parking, the ratio, those one and a half and two spaces are the current standards, right, for our apartment or multifamily requirements.
Yeah, we're not giving them any breaks on parking, and if we do put a guest parking requirement in there, then we're being more strict on parking than we have for any other type of project. I mean, we know from experience that these kind of projects are going to be golf cart, friendly, very heavily. The residents are going to expect spaces for golf carts, and that's fine if they want to provide that. But we're not going to allow the provision of golf cart parking to deduct from their other required parking. My sense of it is that if you do grade level units with all the other requirements that we build in, you're probably pushing the yield down into the 40s on this particular site.
I guess you can't hear me.
We can hear you.
All right, well, what about entrance and exit? You talked about First Avenue. Where would the entrance and exit be on this property?
Well, that's going to depend, and let's keep one thing in mind. We're talking about a text amendment, not necessarily a project approval for a specific site.
Right.
So in this particular, each one of those would be evaluated on a case-by-case basis by Public Works. And Public Works would sort of be the one that makes the call on how many entrances they would be allowed and where. So, I don't know what Public Works would say on this particular site, but that's not what's on the table today. What's on the table today is just the ordinance amendment. And I believe the ordinance is written in such a way that Public Works reserves their right to make those decisions on a case-by-case basis.
Yes. Try.
I still have a real concern about the acreage. I feel that a project like this, or any project like this, would require no less than 5 acres, but that's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
My thoughts on that, Mr. Harvey, is that if we make it smaller, then we can make it to where it's possible for some people. It's harder to find 5 acres of land in the city of North Myrtle Beach that's not already developed. But if we put in the things that we talked about at the last meeting, requiring more open space to match a lot of the other stuff that we have in the city, being a minimum of 25% of the project, we need curbing, landscape, and sidewalks, and requiring parking, guest parking, then that will determine if a developer, if it's going to be financially, if they're going to be able to do it financially, and if it's going to be profitable for them or not. By increasing the acreage, it eliminates a lot of the property where this type of project could be done. And then if we leave it at 2.5 acres, this is just my personal opinion, and we implement the other things, it does take the yield down, but it allows for the preservation of open space and what we're looking to do on the 10-year plan, 50-year plan. to make sure that we just don't have cookie cutters side by side by side by side with no parking, no curbing, no landscaping, and no open space. So I think that at that point, it would be up to the developer to determine if it's financially feasible for them. That's just my personal opinion.
Well, I think you make a good point, Kelly. I really do. And the big question, of course, is open space and what constitutes open space.
Well, it's defined by our zoning ordinance currently. You want to speak to that, Paul?
Well, I don't know if there's anything else to add to it. It is defined in the ordinance. The potential problem with this plan showing is that open space can't be part of the perimeter landscape requirements.
Well, I agree with Callie, but not on the percentage of open space. And as a developer, she's right. You know, it either makes sense. It's what the cost of the land is, what the cost of vertical development is. But when you're talking about 2.5 acres, if 15% of that, if you're doing the sidewalks, the landscaping, then you have a lot of additional pieces in there, but 25% is too much. I mean, you may think it's the right, but 15% is more than adequate for 2.5 acres if you're requiring all the other things, parking but that's my opinion, but.
So,
Yeah, Jim, based on your experience, I mean, my sense of it is if we did bump it up to 20 or 25% open space, then now you're driving the yields down into the low to mid 30s. Is that
Well, yeah. I mean, if you use 15% open space correctly and you're doing the street trees and lining the sidewalks and doing all that, that's adding to the character of a small little niche development. So if you were not doing any of those things, then it would make sense to add additional open space. But if you write in there that you need to have sidewalks, you need to have a certain amount of space for landscaping, additional requirements, then you're adding to the architectural character of the development. And then if you just have 25%, that extra 10% of open space really isn't getting you anything.
Mm-hmm.
from my understanding, open space includes driveways, the space in between houses, the perimeter area of the property. And it includes, does it include parking areas, or am I mistaken on that?
No, there's two different open spaces. One is open space, and you're correct, it's everything that's open. The other is common open space that's commonly owned by people. That does not include the streets and driveways and sidewalks and things like that.
So that's what I'm assuming is.
That is a 15% common open space.
Right, in the draft references common open space. That's fine.
So
Yeah, that's why 15% of common open space is one thing, but yeah, if driveways, I mean, a 2-car driveway is 400 square feet a unit.
Well, that wouldn't count as common open space.
Right, but that's why I'm suggesting the 15% is adequate.
Gotcha. Okay, so common open space is different, and it is defined by which locations, Paul?
I'm not sure what you're saying by which
Well,
location.
Cal, the 15% on the diagram would be where it says the open space, but where you see all those house footprints, the driveways and things like that would not be considered part of that common open space.
So there are two different definitions that we're talking about, common open space and then just regular open space, correct?
Yes, and Paul's gonna go grab the ordinance just to make sure that he's quoting it correctly.
Okay. Because my thoughts were, whenever I was reading it the other day, if we go ahead and add sidewalks and curbing, landscape, and that's automatically gonna go ahead and increase the open space, but I didn't realize there were two different definitions of open space. One is common versus just regular open
Well,
space.
and some of that space can, pull double duty. We require project perimeter buffers. And that's where probably it would be more effective to require additional landscaping in the project buffer. So that those spaces can serve double duty. They can really soften the project and provide beautiful landscaping and serve as a project buffer at the same time.
Yeah, there's a 15-foot project exterior buffer setbacks.
Aaron, the
Yes.
example that this is Ruth Ann. Aaron, the
Yeah, hi.
example that you showed at the last workshop where they had the sidewalks, the driveways, and it showed walking space and the landscaping and all.
Right.
Would that not work in this area right here?
Well,
It was in Hilton Head, but I'm not sure.
I think maybe that's what we're talking about in terms of somewhat of a compromise. If we can't get to the 5 acre minimum, maybe the 2.5 is okay, but you incorporate that additional softscape and sidewalk
Right.
into the development, and then, you know, the project can go forward. But it's also aesthetically more pleasant.
Oh, yes, it definitely. I mean, I thought that looked really great.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know
think
about you guys.
maybe aisle palms, and that might have been one that Sean had in his examples.
It could, I don't know, but it really looked good and it was great.
Right.
How about if we leave the common open space at 15% and then we add a requirement that the project perimeter buffer has to be heavily landscaped and the curbing has to be put in the streets, the sidewalks, and additional landscaping within that street right of way as well.
Would that be included in the 15% or in addition to?
That would be in addition to.
I mean, that's more reasonable than just calling it out like 25%, but I mean, that's workable within a land plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To
So
me,
what you're, go ahead, Kelly.
to me, if you say 15%, but we require curbing, landscape, sidewalks, guest parking, they've got defined space for the golf cart parking in these type of communities, because we know that's going to be needed. I feel more comfortable with that, but I'd also like to know the difference between common open space versus just regular open space.
Yeah, Paul, can you help?
Yeah, I got my ordinance, and the definition is on common open space is land and or water bodies used for recreation, amenity, and buffer area. It shall be freely accessible to all residents of a development where required by this chapter. Open space shall not be occupied by dwellings, buildings, parking areas, streets, or public rights of way, nor shall it include the yards of residential dwelling units required to meet the minimum lot area or lots required to meet the minimum parking area requirements. And by yards, we're talking about the setback area for the houses. That's defined separately in another part of the ordinance, but when the ordinance says yards, it's talking about setbacks.
So
Okay.
for clarification purposes, Paul, would the 15-foot perimeter buffer required project buffer, would that count toward the common open space?
All right, it would, because that would not be part of the yard of a particular lot or house.
Right. So then if we had a pretty aggressive landscaping requirement for that perimeter buffer, you have common open space that is not just grass, it's well landscaped and serves to soften the project.
Okay, so, and just talking about landscaping, we talked about last time adding some requirement of natives, I think, in that requirement. And what do y'all think about foundation landscape? You want to go there with that?
I don't know that, that's just in my opinion, I don't know that we want to get to that level of sausage making and how a developer does their project. I think if a developer wants a successful project, they're going to do some of that themselves. I don't know. What do you think, Jim?
I think, you know, to try to dictate the entire perimeter landscaping, but if you're doing the 15-foot buffer around the property that's seen outside of the project, a developer would put, you've got certain developers that'll put minimum landscaping, they're going to put something, or you got other projects that they'll put, a lot of landscaping. So I wouldn't try to define the perimeter of the units. But requiring, what you want in that 15-foot buffer,
Right.
that's what the public's going to see beyond somebody that moves into the development.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like the individual homeowner should make the choice whether, or the HOA or whatever should make the choice what they want to do around the foundations of each individual structure. But, we should concentrate our efforts on what the public sees in that perimeter.
Okay, yeah, if that's a consensus, we won't dictate it.
This is Rocky. I agree with the requirement for a perimeter buffer area, but we in Barefoot have a good example of what a developer did along Water Tower Road by constructing basically a construction fence to shield the property along Water Tower Road. And we inherited that as the western boundary for Barefoot. And now we're faced with the problem of it deteriorating to the point where the HOA is taking action to try to replace that. And, without requiring anything specific as far as a buffer area or a setback, I think leaves too much flexibility to the developer. If we're going to have a buffer area, perimeter buffer area especially, wouldn't it be better to specify that it screened the development? It's just an open question.
Yes, I agree, Rocky. I think it should. And from what I'm hearing, if there is consensus on this, and by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like we're moving in the direction of coming up with a very aggressive requirement for installing perimeter landscaping in that perimeter buffer that has to be installed and maintained by the HOA, which would serve as sort of the public face of the project from the street rights of way. And I would agree, probably ought to not allow fencing within that perimeter buffer, because the fencing tends to deteriorate over time, and it puts more of a walled off feel to the project.
Well, what they're contemplating doing is some sort of replacement for the fence, for example, along the lines of what was done up on 8th Street, along the back of Tillman Estates or whatever that subdivision is up there. Now, could the buffer area be reduced if the developer put up some sort of wall, for example?
Not the way it's currently written, but I mean, if you want to propose that, we can discuss it.
I'm just trying to think of other alternatives besides landscaping. Like Grand Dunes, their perimeter is that stucco type wall or whatever, but it's another alternative as far as I'm concerned.
So it sounds like the question on the table is, do we allow them to put some sort of fence or decorative wall within that 15-foot perimeter buffer? So y'all can discuss that and see what you think.
That's going to be a case by case basis though, because sometimes you'll have a development, if you're talking 2.5, 3, 4 acres, that it's going to, you may not want to wall it off with a fence. Stucco walls or concrete walls are going to be too costly to try to do for something small. So no developer would do that on a small, very, very small, unless it's on a major road like Water Tower Road or something. So if this is like more of a residential infill or something, then you're going to want a decent amount of landscaping over just slapping up a fence and reducing that 15 feet.
I think it's important, we don't want to get too specific, I guess, on this project or any project in the future. But it's important that if we maintain that 15% and not include some of the things that Kelly was talking about, it would come up to close to 25%. And the developer can do what he wants, whether he puts a wall up or not. But we should look at the, excuse me, the whole picture. And I think it's important to have open space and to say, okay, 15%, but do not include in that 15% some of the factors we've been talking about.
You know, I was thinking some of the subdivisions that I've seen out in the county where the perimeter of the larger parcel, for example, has been walled off, which also forms the rear property line of the parcels that abut it. And that would eliminate that need for the 15% buffer area if they did something like that. Isn't that something we should take into consideration?
You know, I'm all in favor of allowing them to put a fence or a wall up, you know, with certain stipulations on design as an option if they choose to do it. I certainly would not be in favor of requiring it, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable allowing them a reduction in that 15-foot area if they choose to put a wall. But we'll hear what the other members think.
Well, if I could, I wouldn't reduce the common open space for a wall and that kind of trade-off, because the common open space is really designed so that everybody enjoys that open space, and it's not something you reduce because you've got a wall. 15% should be a static figure that everybody would have to meet or exceed.
I just want to ask a question. So I know that we're talking about the minimum being 2.5 acres. As the commission, would you guys be okay if we had a developer come to us with a 10, 20 acre project and they wanted to do these tiny homes on there? Would you guys be okay with the 10% common open space with a 10 to 20 acre project?
I would not.
Maybe have a graduated increase depending on parcel size.
Yeah.
I think that is definitely needed, because then we're reducing we're talking minimums now, but we got to think about all possible options later on. And across the waterway, we're seeing RV parks being put up and other things, which are great. It's just, we want to make sure that we're protecting. But I do like that graduated.
So maybe like if it's 5 acres or less, you know, have the 15% common open space. If it's between 5 and 10 acres, maybe bump it up to 20% or something like that.
Jim, do you have any guidance on that?
I don't like the idea of it, because if you're 5.3 acres, then you're jumping up 5% in open space.
I've got a question, Doug, that I'd like to ask Chris. Chris is in the room, Chris Nuri, and that's on the equal protection. It seems to me like this all plays into density, and we've got to treat all these regardless of the size of the project. Project. It seems like you'd have to treat all these with the same requirements. I don't know that you could, let's say, argue that you get to reduce it because the size is larger.
No, I agree with you, Dan.
Right.
We have to treat them all equally with the same requirements.
Yeah, because you might as well have a different guideline if you're going for 5 to 10 acres. Then, you know, you're just changing the. But again, if you're 5.5 acres, and then all of a sudden you have an increase of.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out, Jim. But I get your point. So, you know, if you had an increase on a project size between 5 and 10 acres, then really it only becomes doable if you're at the upper end of that 5 to 10 acres.
Right.
And you wouldn't do a 5.5 acre project or a 6 acre project.
Could you do like a minimum or a maximum? Like the
Percentage
minimum would be-
based,
Yeah, based on what you have, the acreage.
but if Chris Nuri's saying that they all have to be the same, is that what you were saying, Chris?
Yes.
Oh, no matter what the acreage is.
So your question, Ruth Ann, is can you have a maximum project size?
Right, a maximum
Establishing
that
a
you-
minimum one.
Right.
Conceptually, I don't see why we couldn't. I'm just trying to work through whether we would want to.
Oh, okay.
Probably the largest we would see is something like sea glass, I think. And how
Yeah.
many acres that was? 20, 25?
Right. The project that was approved in Barefoot called Sea Glass is similar in character as far as small homes, and it probably occupies 25, 30 acres, something like that.
And what percentage of that is open space?
The PDD, they follow the PDD requirements for open space, which is how much?
15%.
So it's a minimum 15%. I think they exceeded it a little bit, but
Yeah, you can always do more.
Yeah, so I understand that. I guess I'm still hung up, you know, we talked 15%, we're talking 20%, we're talking 25%. And I have no problem with the 15%, but I also want to know what that includes or doesn't include. That to me is important because we could get up to 20 or 25% if we don't include certain things in the 15%.
Oh, I think that falls back to the definition.
Right, Harvey, that falls back to that definition that Paul read, a common open space. Should we?
Okay.
well, now bear in mind, if we do require extensive landscaping within that perimeter buffer, which we've already determined does count towards your 15%, then this is the only type of project where we have that requirement. So that's an additional protection to the city.
But that would be included in the 15%.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just personally have a problem with that, that's all. But
Harvey,
any
you
other
look-
comments by any other members of the commission regarding this particular item?
Yeah, Harvey, the problem you're having is the minimum of 15%.
Yes, with what it includes, I guess is my question. I think Kelly mentioned it earlier. I think my only question is, what does it include or not include? That's all.
Okay, what does the common open space include or not include, Harvey?
Yes, I guess my question is, what is that 15%? If it doesn't include, or if it does include the common area and so on, then all we're talking about is either perimeter, and I have some real concern about density. When you don't have enough open space, you have more, everything is more dense. And I understand from a developer standpoint where he's coming from, but I also want it to look good from the city standpoint.
Sure.
Sure.
Well, and you know, the common open space requirement for this matches what we do in planned development districts. So it stays consistent with past practices. I think if you try to increase that for a project like this, you're just going to drive the yields down so low that nobody will ever build one.
Well, Harvey,
Yeah.
that's why also that they're suggesting within that 15-foot buffer to not allow that to be reduced, whether you put a wall or not, but have extensive landscaping. So that extensive landscaping in that 15-foot buffer is what's going to be the asset to the surrounding community.
You know, that's important, Jim, and I agree. That's important.
Right, and then in the guideline, or it specifies in the write-up, you know, what is true common area and what is or true common open space versus individual home open space or parking open space.
going back and off this subject just for a minute, what about the storage areas? Didn't we talk about that last time? I think Rocky brought it up, about storage areas.
Yeah, so right now, they're, the way it's written in the proposal, they're allowed, but they're limited to use by project residents only. And they need to have the same architectural style as the primary and meet all the building separation and setback requirements of the primary dwelling unit. On top of that, Rocky did have some additional questions about storage. I went to the zoning division, I asked, anything 180 square feet or less is considered storage, right? Anything, or maybe it's 180 and above becomes more like a garage, right? Treated as the way you would look at it.
No, we limit the size of a storage building to no larger than 180 square feet in most cases.
And if they want to exceed that.
What we've done in the past is if somebody wanted a lot more, let's say for parking a golf cart in and things like that, then it has to be a garage. It has to have a garage door and it has to have a non-combustible floor in it. But setbacks come into play, and if you're looking at a project full of these smaller houses, I don't see much way you can even put let's say a 100 square foot storage shed in and meet your separation requirements. It's going to be very, very limited.
I suspect, and Jim can address this too, I suspect probably what they'll do is in the architecture of the unit itself, they'll build in a little ground level storage shed, probably 60, 70 square feet for their beach chairs and umbrellas and things like that.
Right.
Any other comments or questions regarding 5A?
So do you have some guidance that you want us to make some changes before tonight's meeting?
Any members of the commission?
I know we've talked a lot about, or talked quite a bit about several things. My question would be, what are we gonna propose? I think what we had talked about, and I know Harvey had mentioned it several times, based off of what Paul defined as the common open space, that does not include the land or water required for recreational or buffers. It does not, and it's got to be freely accessible to the people living in that neighborhood. It does not include the parking. It does not include the streets. It does not include yards, and it does not include the setback area of your yard. But it would include the 15-foot project buffer area.
Correct.
With that being said, I know we talked about possible curbing, landscape, and sidewalks within the project. That would or would not be part of the common open space.
Well, I think if they did a sidewalk, let's say if they did a walking path that was outside of the street right of way, you know, just like a pedestrian walking path for the use of the residents, I think that would count toward their open space. But if it's in the street right of way, it would not.
Okay. So if we do require curbing, landscape, and sidewalks, are you guys okay with the minimum 15%? Because that would add more appeal to the project, more space, and more of what we're looking for from what my take for the future development of North Myrtle Beach, and requiring that 15-foot buffer.
Well, to me, and I agree with you, Kelly, and I understand where Jim's coming from also. You know, you want the developer to have enough play to be successful, and I appreciate that. But I look at some units in the county, and I guess I'm maybe I'm prejudiced, but I look by the swing bridge at Little River, and I see those houses being built right on the waterway, and I don't want that in the city of North Myrtle Beach. There is no open space. And
But-
that I
Well,
want to make sure we can protect North Myrtle Beach, that's all.
Well, they actually do have open space. It's probably considered part of that little marsh or the Swash Inlet. But what that doesn't have, and that's what we're talking about, they have no parking for the individual units. They have no visitor parking. They have no sidewalks. They have nothing in front from the road to the house. They
Right.
have no landscaping. They have no 15-foot, perimeter buffer, with excessive landscaping. So they've taken those units right up against the road. And so everything that we are talking about is not that project.
Well, and I want to make sure of it. That's all, Jim. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure of it. That's all.
Yeah.
Sounds like for tonight, what I can do is we can make a change to add some language that within that 15-foot perimeter buffer, they have to do extensive landscaping, probably using native vegetation. We'll flesh that out a little bit, bring you another draft. And, if you need more time to study it, you can always table it again for the next meeting. Or if you're comfortable with it, you can vote.
Hey, Sean, is there something you can put in there that makes sense for engineering, like a percentage of a vegetative buffer?
Yeah, Jim, we can probably put some ideas together and get something that is kind of cohesive and would make sense. And that's really
I
not
remember at Grand Dunes, I thought Grand Dunes, like on 82nd Avenue, had something written in there that said it had to be a certain percentage of vegetative buffer or something. So it's not just throwing in, 27 plants that don't screen, but it's got to be.
Yeah.
But Jim, I thought there should be some sort of language that could be a percentage of vegetative buffer.
Yeah, we can look at it, any examples that Sean comes up with, but then also remember, folks, we've got a licensed landscape architect on our staff, and she is well experienced in coming up with standards like that.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I would do, is just have a requirement of what would be considered proper screening.
Right. So we can bring that to you tonight. And if Sean would like to help us, contribute to that, we'll look at his language as well.
Perfect. Hey, Jim Wood, would that language also include the curbing, landscape and sidewalk requirement?
Yes, we will incorporate that as well.
Okay. And one other question from me on 10E, talking about the golf carts. I know that you defined it as it cannot deduct from the automobile parking. Is there a way to add that language in there just so that it's very clear that it cannot deduct from the automobile parking? Or is that too excessive?
We can make that clear.
Yeah, I agree, because
We can add
that
language in there that says
should
that
be,
voluntarily provided golf cart parking will not reduce the automobile parking requirement.
That's good. That's good.
That sentence in there.
Any other comments from other members of the commission? Okay, let's go on to 5B if we can.
Okay, let me just jot this down real quick.
Aaron and Jim, I'm going to jump off if you don't need me anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jim, Wood, and Chris. Moving on to 5B. All right. This is going okay, I think, right? No comment? Okay.
No, that's all right. You just
Jim,
keep on
I'm
going.
good.
Rosy glasses over here, I guess. Okay, so 5B, this has to do with Z20-4, revising the portion of PDD previously known as Grand Dunes North, Waterway Hills Village, Grand Dunes. There are changes to the master plan and governing documents. And do we have Baird on the line?
I don't believe Baird is joined, but I believe Margaret is right behind me. This is Cameron.
Good, okay, and Cameron, okay, good. Okay, so, okay, so to give you, to give you some history, thank you, Don. What you're looking at right now on the screen is the overall Parkway Group PDD, for those who are not fully familiar with it. And the portion that we're going to be discussing today is it was formerly known as Grand Dunes North. It's in the lower left-hand side of that graphic. The overall entire area of Parkway Group is 1,363 acres. It's along the Intercoastal Waterway and also off the exit of Highway 31 at Water Tower Road, just to get your bearings. And the specific portion that we're talking about, Grand Dunes, the Grand Dunes portion of it was approved initially in June 2016. It was called Grand Dunes North at the time. It consisted of 243-acre expansion of the Grand Dunes private luxury resort located within the city of Myrtle Beach. So it's just extending over into the city of North Myrtle. And at that time, approval of 888 dwelling units of varying types and densities, divided into pods and integrated in an overall cohesive master development was approved. Open space totaled 20%, and multifamily was not part of the development approval. There's also a separate and independent amendment to the master development agreement that controls this property. That agreement sets forth pro rata reimbursement to the city for the South Carolina Highway 31 interchange at Water Tower Road, construction of an internal traffic circle, and beach access parking fee per dwelling unit. That was an agreement between the applicants and city council. Dawn, if you could just advance the screen one slide and show you just kind of what we're talking about. So just to go over what I mentioned, the far left shows the property in question today. And there's a little couple grayed out areas, and that's to show you that the land swap has occurred between the adjacent property owner, Coterra. She got land, and then they gave land as a swap, an equal exchange. And so the boundaries of what was Grand Dunes North, or what's today known as Waterway Hills Village, has changed slightly. So that's in the upper left-hand corner. In the middle is just a perspective, what that outline in red looks like of the proposal versus the Parkway Group in sum, as well as the aerial. And then to the far right, maybe it's obscured by your the squares of us, is like a further review, further look of the property from from higher above, and then how it relates to the Grand Strand and then the overall state itself. Okay, so I just want to give everybody's bearing here. What I want to tell you too is, and we'll get into this, the applicant, NGD Property 2 LLC, which is L-Star Ventures, an affiliated company, and Stephen J. Vining, who's managing partner at L-Star Ventures, represented by Baird Stewart, L-Star Ventures. Of course, there's Cameron from DRG on the line. He's also part of this, and as well as Margaret Lacal, who is L-Star as well. They're requesting amendment to the Parkway Group PDD for the Waterway Hills Village section, as I mentioned. Again, it's a continuation of the Grand Dunes development theme into the city of North Myrtle Beach, incorporating private luxury resort, open space, conservation areas, walking trails, bike paths, and resort style amenity package. I mentioned the boundary changed a little bit, so it's gone down to 239 acres and encompasses estate lots, cottages, paired villas, luxury townhomes, waterfront townhomes, and apartments. There's approximately 8 acres. That's the part that was removed from the development with the swap with Coterra next door, consisted of about eight acres. And that was to avoid impacting Long Branch Creek. So that creek will remain not impacted, unimpacted. There's a mixture of lot types and housing styles envisioned. So it's a range from 70 to 90 foot wide single family custom home estate lots and 52-foot wide single family cottage lots. Also to paired villa flats and townhouse lots. There's still a blend of architectural styles with Mediterranean and based on market conditions, there's more of a predominant architectural style of traditional low country that's going to be built. Although the pattern book continues to contain the Mediterranean architectural option, each neighborhood within the project will have a consistent architectural theme. Making mention of those 880 dwelling units that are now proposed and 336 multifamily apartments. Those are new. The total is 1,216 units, and it's to occur in the following arrangements over a series of phases. So you have 75 estate lots, you have 431 cottages, you have 226 paired villas, 110 luxury townhomes, 38 waterfront townhomes. Again, that's 880 of those units. And then as a separate section, it's a standalone multifamily apartment development. Those are the 336. That adds a variety of housing types and price ranges within the project that weren't otherwise offered before, including workforce housing. And it also would serve as a transitional land use buffer and consumer base to future commercial and a buffer from the Members Club golf course maintenance facility. An additional 50 feet of buffering from the future single family homes would also be provided. And this site, the multifamily site, includes 15% open space with a separate private amenity facility. So let's take a look at that. Advance that slide one, will you? Okay, so that was the former approval from June 2016, known as Grand Dunes North. That's crossed out. To advance the slide one, what they're proposing today. So this is the master site plan. In the upper left corner, I guess the lower left corner, that would be the multifamily apartment development. 336 apartments in there. It's a separate project. Not part of the Grand Dunes. It's not associated with Grand Dunes. And then everything else to the right of that consists of the 880 units in the varying lot configurations and types. I want to make mention too, the area that changed. So in the upper portion of the development, it's kind of the boot of the project, if you will. That's where that part of that 8 acres was swapped with the adjacent landowner, and then also along where it says the letter C, along in there. So that C portion, it's in the tan color. That's all new to this development. And then the kind of the toe extending out from the foot of that development property was removed. If you could advance the slide one, we'll see. Okay, so this is getting a little bit later into the discussion. This is the open space. Let me just explain too the understanding the individual lot arrangements with respect to lot sizes and yard setbacks. Did everybody see on page 2 of the staff report the breakdown of the lot arrangements for the estate, cottage, paired, townhome, and apartments? Did everybody get that? I wanted to tell you that.
Which page are you referring to, Aaron?
What now?
Which page are you referring to?
Page 2 of 4, and it's the individual lot arrangements.
Yeah, right.
Lot sizes and yard setbacks.
Gotcha.
All of those are the same from previously, from 2016 amendment. However, the new language would allow soffits and roofs to overhang into setbacks. That's new language. And that's going to affect your building separations.
When I read that, it's on page 3. And it's saying that porches can extend into the front and side setbacks. So
That's been the case since 2016.
So it was allowed in 2016?
It was. Yeah.
So really there are no setbacks and they could have those extend and have 1 foot in between, let's say a porch in between houses.
Well, typically, yeah, I mean, the porches can extend into the front and the side.
So let's say we're neighbors. My porch could extend, yours could extend, and we could have 1 foot in between our porches, hypothetically.
Right, that's exactly right. And it's not, that doesn't mean that's gonna happen, but it gives them the ability to encroach into the porch. And it may not be that extreme.
But it could be.
Yeah, it could be. It could be.
And your side yard setback on your estate homes is 7.5 feet minimum?
Yeah, and what I wanted to point out too is from the zoning division notes that proposed soffits and roofs cannot encroach into required side yards. It's just by code, there's a code and it's not allowed. A solution is to reduce the side yard setback to whatever the width of the soffit roof becomes. So for example, some of the situation occurred in Barefoot Resort, and it led to the community to request a reduction of side yards to 4 feet with 12 soffits and no encroachment. So so as a similar example here, instead of allowing the encroachment of a soffit or a roof, these side yard setbacks will just be reduced to 4 feet, for example. Instead of 5 feet, it'd be 4 feet without a soffit able to extend in to the setback. We can let's do this. Let's continue on, and then we can follow up with that, and we can discuss that more with the applicant. I wanted to tell you too, access. So if you those are, we'll get to those a little later. Could you go back, Dawn, a slide? Go back one more. Yeah, okay, cool. So I want to talk about access. Access to and from the development is from the South Carolina Highway 31 Water Tower Road and a private spine road. So that's what you see up there to the far left. Once past the multifamily section, which is at MLK area, the remainder of the development will be gated and private. The entire development will utilize private roadways owned and maintained by a community association. All roadways will meet internal street standards as exhibited within the PDD booklet and differ most notably from city street standards by not requiring sidewalk on both sides of the street. Furthermore, the analysis has been done by DRG, the engineer of record, evaluating the additional unit increase up to 1,216 total, and have determined that there's no adverse effects to the road, to the volume, or there's no adverse effects to the volume or speed impacts to the main collector road and Waterway Hills Village or Water Tower Road traffic circle currently under construction. So the additional 336, 300, roughly 328 more units that doesn't negatively affect any of the roadway systems that are currently built or under construction. Included on the master plan are 2 additional private gated emergency access roads to be installed by the developer and maintained by the community association. Those are up in the upper portion. If you see that C, if you see the C or the J, B up in there, there's an arrow pointing to 2. There are 2 arrows pointing to those accesses that would access Water Tower Road. Those are the additional emergency accesses that I'm referring to. By today's standards, at least 3 full accesses would have been needed to support the proposed density, like our recent land regulations require. However, the master development agreement froze the land development regulations and prevent full adherence to today's standard. So these emergency access points were negotiated with the developer, and they too recognize the need for increased safety and provide access to the existing Water Tower Road 50-foot Horry County maintenance easement and out to South Carolina 31 in the event of an emergency. So we worked with the developer to have those additional 2 emergency exits provided. Open space, and now we can go to the next slide now, the open space slide. That'll give you a nice example of what it would look like. Open space within the project is calculated at 18%. 15% is what they need to maintain. In addition to the amenity site, which has a pool, workout facilities, meeting and entertainment areas, the open space master plan depicts wetlands, buffers, natural areas, stream buffers, active parks, passive parks, perimeter buffer, and community landscape areas and stormwater facilities. Additionally, all neighborhoods except the apartment site next to the Waterway Hills Village will be part of the Grand Dunes Master Association and have access to the Grand Dunes Ocean Club. So extensive buffering has been incorporated. Generally, there's a 20-foot buffer, perimeter buffer around the entire project. There's no buffer along the Grand Dunes portion of the development, the western boundary, where the estate lots are planned, because they want to take advantage of the views of the Grand Dunes Members Golf Course. Pedestrian access and other gathering places near the intercoastal region adjacent to the amenity. Some buffer areas may incorporate pedestrian trails, grassed areas, landscaping, and are intended to provide area separation rather than opaque screening. Additionally, a 30-foot landscape buffer along the primary spine road and 50-foot landscape buffer between the proposed apartment site and Waterway Hills Village single-family lots is included into the master plan. So that's what you see there. We wanted to know the fire-wise community standards and principles should be employed for this development because of the hazards of wildfire. Those are things like establishing and preserving the preservation of structure emission zones around buildings and similar should be incorporated into the design. So they're using, fire resistant landscape building materials and thinking about how they're placing those on the site. We also talked about the trees in this staff report, and so I want to get to that. I want to get to that as well. So let's first look. Let's go back to the lots. Okay, so if you advance the slide down. Don's still there. Yeah, so that's the estate lot, and then they go on to from the estates to the cottage pair, townhomes, and then finally the apartments. I just want to emphasize it's important to understand the building envelopes and what they're proposing here. But it's also important to note, much of this has already been determined. And they are changing, however, the architecture, and they're changing the lot arrangements. They're changing the number of estate homes, for example. They're changing the number of cottage homes. They're changing those ratios up, but the typical lot exhibits, except for the addition of the soffits entering in to the setbacks, are all the same. So I wanted everybody to understand that. And so as you go through here, Dawn, just go through the slides here, and we'll show this. These are the estate homes. These are the paired villas. There should be cottage. If you go on, townhome, apart. Okay, so I didn't get the cottage. These are excerpts out of your full packet. Onto the apartments, and it gives you, gives you an understanding of the character images, and then how these would look. What do y'all think about those lots? I mean, in other words, the step. I know in the past, garage spaces have been something that we've discussed, right? And it came up most recently with Robert's Roost, right? And in a distance from the sidewalk, 25 feet, 27 feet, 20. We had a lot of discussion on that. In this case, it's already set up for 17-foot garage face to the edge sidewalk. I just wanted to bring that up to you. I just wanted to raise your awareness on that. That it was previously approved. Is there anything else we need to discuss regarding those arrangements, and maybe with the developer as well?
What you're saying,
Aaron,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think that it's citywide as far as the setback, as far as the eaves not going into the setbacks. And I think we should all be on the same page as far as, the eaves not going into the side setbacks. And I have a problem too with the decks and stuff going into the side setbacks, because as Callie was saying, theoretically you could have two decks with only a foot in between them. And right now the city ordinance is no decks or anything encroaching into the side setbacks. No eaves into the side setbacks. And if you want to do a deck or something, it can encroach in the front and the rear up to 3 foot as long as you don't cover it. So I think we should still try to be on the same page to have uniformity throughout the city. That's just my opinion.
I agree, Harry.
I agree too. I think that would be a lot better if we just stay consistent throughout the community.
I agree as well. I also feel like the estate homes that are on the waterway should have a larger setback in the backyard, in the rear yard. I feel like some of the setbacks are a little tight.
Yeah, a lot of the lots going along the waterway and a lot of subdivisions throughout the county, they'll have a 60-foot bulkhead maintenance easement there to where they have to stay 60 feet off the rear property line in order to, in case you have erosion or something. But I'm not proposing 60 foot, but I'm just saying that's what they do have. They have anywhere from maybe 25 foot to up to 60. And I think maybe, I forget, down in Myrtle, maybe Carolina Waterway Plantation, they've got like a 60-foot rear setback for, bulkhead maintenance and stuff like that. So
Is that by the Army Corps of Engineers, Harry, or is that just local?
no, that's just in each individual subdivision.
Okay.
The Army Corps only goes up, they have a right of way, and then they've got a 80-foot offset from the center of the waterway as far as docks and stuff, but that's normally just, each subdivision has their own, but they definitely hardly ever have just 25 foot off the rear if they're on the waterway. They've got some kind of maintenance easement that is more than 25 foot.
Does this include that? Is there,
Well, whichever more is restrictive. So either the setback or any kind of maintenance easement. If the maintenance easement's more, then that's the deciding factor.
I
so
see.
they're one and the same, basically? Is that what you're saying?
They're all different. I mean, I was just saying, I do agree with you that you might need a little bit more on the waterway there.
Okay. So let me just get this straight, and then maybe we can defer the applicant on answering that. But we're going to ask the applicant to consider following the current code, which would only allow up to 3 feet of encroachment into the front or rear setbacks with a porch, right? And it has to be uncovered. Is that right?
No, I think what Harry's talking about is we've got an allowance for unenclosed steps up to 3 feet on the front and rear.
Correct. It doesn't even.
To the setback.
Period.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so in this case, the porches, they've sought and already gotten approval originally to allow those porches to encroach into the setback. And of course, porches encroaching into the front setback, in my mind, also can encourage pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods and streets and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I don't know that we should strike that down, but maybe the side yard is more the concern, or perhaps we should tailor the allowance to the porch, allowing to encroach into the setback a certain amount, but maybe not all the way. In other words, a front porch helps for pedestrian friendliness, right? If we take that away and again, these are already reduced. I mean, a front yard of 20 feet, a front yard of 15 feet for the estate and a cottage. 15 feet's not that far, 20's not that far, but do you see where I'm coming from on that? Are you completely opposed to porches extending into the front setback?
I feel like I'm okay with that. I'm not sure if there should be, some sort of standards that we put on that, but I don't agree with porches going into the setbacks on the side yards because the setbacks are so small on the side yards.
And I don't believe you should count the soffit. I think I agree with Harry. If you're going to have a setback on the sides or whatever it is, you can't have the soffit extend into the setbacks.
Yeah, Harvey, this is on the overhangs, this is where they're coming from on that. The general and supplemental section of the zoning ordinance, which applies to every zoning district, including PDD, allows overhangs to go into the front and rear setbacks up to 2 feet. That's every district has that allowance. You don't have to put anything special in the PDD ordinance for that. In the side yards, the overhang cannot go into the setback at all. And so what they were asking for was a 5-foot setback on the side, with the overhang being allowed to go into it. And what we've said is, no, you can't do that. The
That's right.
ordinance already prohibits you being able to go into that setback. So the recommendation was like at Barefoot, where they just reduced the side yard setback to 4 feet instead of 5 feet. And with a 4-foot setback, the overhang cannot go into it. But what you find is the foundations are 5 feet from the line, and then your overhang is that extra foot, making it 4 feet from the line. So in other words, they can't change what's in the general and supplemental section of the ordinance. It applies to everybody. So since you can't make it special for the PDD, you just reduce that setback by 1 foot and say it's a 4-foot setback, but the overhangs can't go into that. Do you follow me on that? I don't know if I was clear on the explanation of that.
I'm still a little confused, Paul, I really am.
Yeah, if you got a 5-foot setback and say, we want an exception to be able to put the overhang into it and make it 4 feet. The answer is no, you can't do that. The ordinance strictly prohibits that. You can't put the overhang into that 5-foot setback. So since in a PDD, you can have a different setback established, it's why don't you make the setback 4 feet instead of 5 feet? And that's all you're doing. And with that 4 feet, you're allowed to, let's say you can make the wall 5 feet from the line and put that overhang for that extra 1 foot. Basically just reduce the setback by a foot.
It's
the same result.
It's almost the same thing.
Well, it's exactly the same thing.
Well, what happens there though, Paul, and I do agree with you if you say to do it like that, because out in the county,
I think we lost you, Gary.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say that, you know, the purpose of the setbacks originally was to
stonework facade, and then when you come back and the attorney, there's an attorney or somebody wanting to do a closing on it, and we have to show it, we show the house being in the setbacks, and then the attorneys say, well, that's cloud on title, and sometimes they won't touch it. So then the city had to come, or the county had to come back and make an ordinance to where they do a 4-inch exception. So I do agree, Paul, if you say no overhangs, then just reduce the side setback to 4 foot.
Well, Barefoot did that, and all those houses out of Barefoot, if you ride through there and look at them, if they've got 4-foot setbacks, and so the houses are 8 feet apart. Closest point. The foundations are actually 10 feet apart.
So my question is, based off of this, with the setbacks for the estate home being 7.5 feet, cottage homes 5 feet, paired villa 5 feet, why are we reducing the setbacks when we're talking about density in our future and too much density in these type of projects? Why are we reducing setbacks and the minimum of 10 feet in between from soffit to soffit? Maybe I'm missing something.
Well, I mean, that goes back to 2016, Callie. And you know, that's where the setbacks coming from. I'm gonna get to that section in your code in your book.
Well, in the meantime, though, Kelly, it's a legitimate question, and it's what do you want?
Yeah, right.
And that's
exactly.
you know, that's part of the discussion is what do you want to see?
What do you want? Realizing that this is a carryover from 16, and then Exhibit E4, for example, estate homes, side setback 7.5 feet. On the original 2016 plan, and then it's 10.5 feet side today. Maybe that's not acceptable to you. You know, that's a discussion that you're all going to have with the applicant.
So my question is, we're talking about 2016 when this was proposed. Have these setbacks and all this already been predetermined and approved by somebody else? Or is this something that can be amended? Maybe.
Well, the answer is both. Yes, it was already approved by City Council in 2016, coming through Planning Commission as a recommending body. And yes, it's coming through today as an amendment, and that's on the table for discussion.
But then the Planning Commission has the right to make these changes or not?
You have the right to comment on them and suggest changes, yes. You can look at all this again, because everything's back on the table. It's a major amendment.
Well, I agree. I agree. It's way too tight as far as I'm concerned. But I can appreciate where a developer's coming from, but I just think it's pretty tight.
But this has been approved by city council back in 2016, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Hmm.
And the only part of these lot arrangement exhibits that has changed is that soffit extension in. So wherever it would read 5-foot minimums for side yards for the cottage, for the period villa, it ought to probably read 4 feet, with the understanding that soffits and roofs cannot extend into the side yard setbacks.
What if in 5 years, somebody, some developer comes back in and says, okay, setbacks 4 feet and we need another foot extension into the setback area for soffits? I mean, you know, where do you actually draw a firm line so that this tightness, I mean, they're trying to make every square inch of land usable, and I understand that, but it comes to a point where it starts to get too close. I don't even see the need for this amendment myself. I think 7.5 feet setback on side property lines, you know, that's too tight as far as I'm concerned, but it's already done, so.
Well, let me give you guys an example. I just did some simple math and maybe I'm incorrect. But if you look at, I don't know if you guys can see this.
Right, yeah, we can see.
Okay, can y'all see that?
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
If you look at this A section right here,
Uh,
base, Yep.
Okay, yeah,
A
the
section.
yellow, yeah.
perfect.
Those are
A
these.
section at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
It has a total of, nope, on the left-hand side, the long one at the bottom. There you go, right there. That's what I'm talking about. It's got 47 lots in that yellow A section that they're highlighting right there. If you were to add, instead of doing a side yard setback of 7.5 being the minimum, if you added 2.5 feet to that, you could take out, and this is assuming the width of the lot is 70 feet, because it can be 70 to 90. You take out one of those lots and it would account for 28 lots to have a 10-foot space in between eave to eave. You've got a total of 47. So if you took out 1.5 of those lots, or 1.67 of those lots, you would get your 10-foot side yard setback. So why are we making things more dense when, and based off of, maybe I'm new, so I don't know, but based off of what we've talked about, excessive density with encroachment into people's property, we're not wanting developments that are houses stacked on top of each other.
Okay, yeah, that's, I understand where you're coming from, and here's what you all really need to take into consideration of this, in this amendment. Much of this is already entitled, much of it was already approved in 2016. The portions that are added to this amendment and the rearrangements of the style of unit being proposed really is what you should be focusing on. So are you okay with the change to the land swap of 8 acres, the Coterra swap, the area in the C that adds the additional units there? Are you okay with the difference in lot styles and varieties? Are you okay with the addition of the multifamily 336 apartments? That's really what you should be focused on, and understand that yes, density is important, and yes, setbacks are key, but that's already been discussed and entitled. And if you continue kind of on that, if you continue on that discussion, and you get too hung up on it, it's probably going to completely upset the applicant from going forward.
Well, what you're saying is actually all this has been approved already. And the only thing we're going to be looking at are the few changes that is requested. Is that correct?
Yes. Right, that's exactly right.
But we could vote on this, and if the commissioners decide to accept this, they can also put a stipulation into the city council that they're very concerned about the setbacks on all the dwellings. Is that correct?
Yes, you could certainly do that.
Well, maybe that's what we should do.
Well, this is Jim Wood. I was able to come back to the meeting after my department head staff meeting. You're certainly free to do that, but council may have the reaction, well, where was this objection when this thing was originally entitled?
That's true. That's true. So actually, all we are deciding upon today or tonight will be what's brought to us and has nothing to do with the setbacks. Is that correct?
Well, only to the point of the soffit extension into, and we had to point that out, that should be fixed. That should be fixed to meet the code that Paul was citing.
Well, I personally do not believe a soffit may extend into the setback.
I
don't know
agree
how
too,
the rest-
Harvey.
Go ahead.
No, I just said I agree also, Harvey.
Okay, so, right, so if you agree with that, then that would cause those side yard setbacks to be a minimum 4 feet. And the soffit roofs could not extend into the side setbacks.
Where do you get 4 feet? I guess I'm a little, on which,
Yeah.
Okay, I'll explain. So right now, there are side setbacks of 5 feet. And
wait a minute.
cottage home and paired villa lot.
Okay, yes, I see that. Okay.
Okay. So it's 5 feet, and they also have written in new language that the soffit roof can extend into that side yard setback.
And I personally would be opposed to that.
Okay, so that would, the applicant would have to understand that then that language has to change. The soffits could not encroach the roof
I
side.
don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel on that.
And
I'm opposed to it.
right.
I mean, if we have no control currently on the setbacks, the only control we have on the setback is regard to that soffit. And what they're asking for, we would say, no, they can't have that.
Right,
Yeah, they need to take that out.
right.
And so.
But that doesn't automatically bring that down to 4 feet up either.
No,
Correct.
take out all mention of the overhang or soffit, as you say, period. It's just gone. And we
Right.
have to reduce the side yard setback to 4 feet.
No, I thought we said 5 feet. Am I wrong?
Setbacks with an allowance to encroach with the soffit.
Why? Yeah, I thought we were saying that we are not going to reduce any setback space any lower than what is already listed on this plan.
So Jim hasn't heard this. Barefoot had the same example, right? They wanted to encroach into the side yard setback with their soffits and have 5 foot setbacks, right? Side yard setbacks. So instead, we said, no, you can't do that. You can't encroach into the setback, but your setback can go down 1. It can go down.
Well, the
4.
setback, well, we didn't say they could go down. The setback can be anything that council wants it to be with your recommendation. So y'all recommend, you could say, no, we don't recommend reducing it at all. Then they're more than likely, their pad and their wall is gonna be 6 feet from the line with a foot overhang. And that works just as well. That's what most of the houses in the city are. They can't ask to change something in the general and supplemental as part of the PDD. General and supplemental would have to be a totally different text amendment to allow overhangs into the side yard. They're just not allowed. So that language just has to come out. Then the side setback, it's a PDD, they can ask for whatever they want to.
Right, and if you want to hold them to a 5 foot, so be it. If you want to maybe knock that down to 4, like we're talking about, that's on the table too. I mean, it's up to you. It's just that the soffit can extend into the side yard. That's the bottom line, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Have they made the request to lower it to 4 feet?
No, they said, let us have 5 foot side yard setbacks, but, which is the same as the 2016, but let us encroach, that's new, let's encroach into that setback.
Okay, well, I think the commission just says no to that.
Yeah.
Right.
That'd be
My
the-
opinion is just to keep the approved setbacks from 2016 and be consistent with no soffits or eaves into setbacks.
Correct. I agree.
I agree too.
Let's just.
Good.
Okay, since that's the only thing we can decide on. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, now let's just go back to something that I know that you've talked to me about regarding trees.
Yes, okay, let's talk about trees. So, Dawn, can you advance the slide more? To, these are the, this is all in your book too, with the signs and all that, but go ahead, Dawn, sorry. Amenity centers that are proposed for the developments. We had all this in your book. That's the wetland, those are the street. Okay, so, so Harvey, what, and all planning commission, here is the exhibit B3. Okay, B3, it's in your
Notebook.
booklet.
Yeah.
Okay, there's also one more B4. Just advance that one, Don, will you? Okay, that's B4. Okay. Speaking with staff, okay, we have determined that if B3, that exhibit before, Don, B3, if that exhibit stays in this packet, it meets the zoning ordinance criteria that a survey be submitted showing the isolated trees 24 inches of grade, okay? If that stays, and then we remove B4, if we remove this exhibit from the booklet, then that makes your approval today, if you're so inclined to approve this, not needing any sort of condition of approval with BZA looking at it.
And let me expound on that a little bit further. The PDD ordinance simply requires a survey identifying the location of the trees. They went above and beyond that requirement by providing this additional exhibit that shows what they wanted to remove. So what we're suggesting is instead of having that exhibit B4 in there, which then makes your approval or your consideration more difficult because then you have to condition things. Let's just have them remove that exhibit altogether, and then you don't have to condition any approval, and then the BZA can handle the trees as intended by the code. And that way you don't have to worry about conditioning things based on what the BZA does or doesn't do. We just need to have them remove B4 altogether out of the as an exhibit. It doesn't belong in this PDD.
The thing that concerns me, and I guess it's a minor thing, but of course I live close to Robert's Roost, and when they come in and clear cut everything, that it's a real problem to me personally. And I just don't want to give this developer the right to go in and say they have to cut all these trees down because of sewer lines and streets and so on and so forth, with no regard to making some changes in the streets or whatever the case may be, and leaving some trees or leaving as many trees as possible.
Right. So
Well, the tree exhibit that they provided it shows removals within the right of way and on private property, or just one or the other?
So the other two exhibits that I sent last week that we talked about, they had to do with 6BD, the pod, and the spine road. And remember, it was a double image, one on top showed what was staying, what was going, and then on the bottom showed the street trees. That is still relevant, although it's associated with the platting of those areas. And the plats were not ready to go forward on today's agenda.
Right. That's the key distinction, Harvey, is that those decisions are made at the plat level. And since we've pulled the plats off of today's agenda, we don't need to worry about that tonight.
Okay, all
For this
right.
master plan thing.
You'll get another crack.
Yeah, we'll get another shot at that when the plats come back on the agenda.
Right.
That's fine with me. I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel.
Okay, so just so you understand too, BZA is still weighing in on trees on Thursday, the schedule is.
On
so
private property.
On private property. And Dawn, that's the advanced one here that I sent to everybody in that email last week. That's what BZA is going to be still looking at on Thursday. That's the private side. That's not what you all are. And each time any additional trees in the future sections of this development as they come in the additional phases are involve these 24-inch or greater trees, they're also going to have to have subsequent reviews with BZA on the private side.
Yeah, and the BZA has already said, we're not comfortable doing this project wide. You're going to have to bring in each individual phase on a case by case basis and let us.
Good.
So
Okay.
because the plats have been taken off the agenda, the bottom line is you no longer need to worry about conditioning anything tonight.
Okay, good. I appreciate that.
So we will get the chance, once BZA reviews this, it'll come back to us for a review or no?
What will happen is during the platting exercise, you will get a crack at the trees proposed for removal within the street rights of way, because that's part of a plat. You will
Okay.
still get the opportunity to review that and to suggest, if realignment of roads or whatever to avoid trees. So you will have a crack at that. But the trees on private property on the lots will be handled by the BZA.
That makes sense.
And that's consistent with the way that we do things.
Right.
Yeah, it's actually a little better. We've had a couple subdivisions in the past where there's been quite a bit of conversation of who did what, and both bodies seem to be hesitant because the other body hadn't acted. And I think this is better, and we're evolving into a better process, I think, with this.
Good. I appreciate that. Anything else for the meeting this morning?
One question on that. When you say in the
Yes.
future, we'll only be able to speak to possible right-of-ways, not private property. When you say right-of-ways, does that also include like the wetlands and where they plan on putting their open space, common open space?
No, this would apply to street rights of ways and utility corridors, like if there's any easements required for utilities or street rights of way. That's where you'll be able to weigh in on the trees, because that's all part of the platting exercise.
So right now,
They will handle trees. on-
everything can be based off of, and let me know if I'm understanding this wrong. Right now, everything could be clear cut except in the right of way.
No,
No.
BZA is going to determine on a phase by phase basis what they can take out on private property. It's just,
Gotcha. Okay.
you guys were worried about having to condition your approval based on what they're going to do, but since the plats have been taken off the table for tonight, you don't have to worry about that right now.
Right.
Okay.
So we got two commissions that are working in conjunction, I believe. Is that correct, Jim?
Yes, the BZA is going to take a very hard look at the trees on private property on the
Right.
lots. And they've already told the developer, we're not giving you blanket project-wide approval on anything. We're going to do it on a phase by phase basis so we can drill down and look at that in a lot of detail. So
Good.
that's the BZA's role. Planning Commission's role is going to be determining the tree removals within street rights of way and utility corridors.
And that could be coming to you all as soon as next meeting. It just depends on
Okay.
the process with plats and staff review.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? I have one.
We still have a couple of items too on the agenda, 3, Harvey.
I have one question now. Are we getting a new password and number for tonight, or is it the same?
There was a separate email sent and it probably is, I'm not sure, but it's a separate email, Harvey, and it'll invite you to a 4:30 meeting.
Okay, and that would give me my new password and new numbers or whatever the case may be.
Yes, and if you need help with that, just call me.
Okay.
Before you leave, we still have.
That hasn't been sent out for tonight's meeting yet at this point.
Okay, but it will be then, right, Suzanne?
Right.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Aaron, I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. There's still 3 items on the agenda that we need to discuss. Suzanne, do you want to take the plats?
Sure, I'll go forward. These are 2 plats for a lot that's located on the corner of 9th Avenue South and Hillside. And a couple of meetings ago, Planning Commission considered the lot on the opposite corner at this intersection, but this is a lot that currently has one single-family residential structure on it, and they're subdividing it into 4 lots, keeping the structure there. The smallest lot is 5,000 square feet. The largest lot is 10,000 square feet. Overall density is 7 dwelling units per acre, and the setbacks conform. There's 2 items technically on the agenda. One is the preliminary plat, and then one is the final plat. And the final plat would be the next item. Yep. And it's basically the same document, just formatted to our final plat requirements. And this is not a bonded final plat because there's no infrastructure required. But the developer, Jared Roberts, will have to make a payment to the mitigation bank for Hillside Drive South to pay in for sidewalk. But the city engineer has decided that that is not a location where they're going to actually install sidewalk. So that's why it brings in the mitigation bank to this project.
Any of the commissioners have a problem with B and C? Okay. We now go to D, is that correct?
Yeah, the D is a minor amendment that has to do with Waterway Hills Village. This is a minor that is going forward at the same time as the major to allow them more flexibility on getting the platting started because the major has to wait for the 2 readings at City Council. So this minor is just changing these 2 pods that are letters J and B. They're 6B and 6D technically in the master plan. One of the biggest changes, they're adding a cul-de-sac at pod 6D. They're also revising slightly the spine road to what is approved, not in terms of changes to the right-of-way width or anything, but they're changing how much of that is public versus what was previously approved.
Any questions with that?
They're not
Okay.
changing density or anything else, so.
All right. Any other comments or questions?
Just one real quickly. Forgot to tell you, old business 5C. If it wasn't already clear on your agenda, that was requested to temporarily withdraw by staff. That was the definition of sleeping area. So we're not discussing that whatsoever tonight or anytime in the near future.
Okay. All right, see you all at what, 4:30, is that correct?
Yeah, 4:30.
Okay,
4:30.
over and out.
Have a great day.
Over and out.
Have a good day.
All right, this is Aaron, can I help you? Okay, could I see your phone?